Bradley had a son called Tom. We do remember him. Barbados is blessed with a modern infrastructure. It has always been my view that whereas Bradley Adams concentrated on social and human development by expanded democratic privilege, and whereas Barrow was more ideological in his focus, helping to create a national consciousness and moving us towards independence and helping us to leave the trappings of a colonial legacy behind, Tom was more visionary in terms of the infrastructural development, the architecture of this country, and modernizing the economy and the country. And I think serving only for a short while, Tom Adams achieved some significant attainments in the life of this country. The modern architecture, infrastructural architecture, which is Barbados, I believe, in my view, should be credited to Tom Adams. I believe that. Can you imagine what Barbados would be today without the ABC highway? I mean, even with the ABC highway, we are in a mess. Can you imagine what it would be like without the ABC highway? The central bank in Barbados, although today led by questionable ability, although today led by questionable integrity with respect to political matters, the Barbados, the central bank today stands as a strong symbol of an emerging nation in earlier years that took its stand among the nations of the world and pursued a path of economic development which would bring not only benefit to its people but gain us respect from around the world, attract investment to our shores. The central bank is but a symbol. It is the work that's done in there that helps us along. And better days are coming when changes come to those who work there. Tom Adams must be credited for having a vision of a modern infrastructurally developed society here in Barbados. And that is what we are today. But Tom Adams must also be credited for a strong social piece of revolutionary legislation with respect to plantation tenantries in this country. Do you understand that? The history of Barbados is that but we were a series of plantations. If economic empowerment and social advancement and human development was to be optimized in Barbados, there needed to be some social piece of legislation, revolutionary in its character, that addressed the historical situation of Barbados being a plantation society. And plantation tenantries legislation was just that. You know how many people have come into a better livelihood? How many people have come into a better quality of life because of that social piece of legislation? We don't shout a lot about it, but it is absolutely important. And yet we have 21 witless fellas on the other side saying that this party is about economy and not about society. But I hardly make a distinction between the two, because if you don't have a good economy, you can forget the society, and if you have a poor society, God help you with respect to your economy. And so that's what Tom Adams must be credited for. He created a trajectory for modernization in Barbados.
What we are facing in Barbados is a government budget, no concrete plans for financing the greatest deficit that we have ever seen. Now everybody knows that in a small developing society, open economy, you got to exist for deficit financing. You understand that? And there are times when you will push the deficit up outside of what may be acceptable under all these international norms and these international institutions norms. But if you can push up the deficit, you must have something to show for it at the end of the day. You can't be increasing the ways and means limit, borrowing money and printing money to pay people's salaries. The one thing that we are doing, listen, if you live in a household and you are making $5,000 and spending $7,000 just to pay recurrent bills, just to pay like bill, your water bill, your car, gas, everything, and you have got to borrow on a fixed income, remember, you have got to borrow to be able to repay that. Sooner or later, the man, you can't pay back the man, and the man who you borrow from will tell you, don't come back. This is no rocket science, you know. You don't need Clyde and Owen to interpret this for you. This is madness. Anytime you have a government that cannot meet its recurrent expenditure on a monthly basis, the country is bankrupt. And I'm going to guarantee a loan. A man with $10 in the pocket can guarantee a loan for a man of $100,000? What foolishness, huh? What nonsense for guaranteeing what? And listen to me, and this is it. This country, what we are seeing every day, poor people getting poorer because of the income shrinkage that we are getting out of this economy. And I'm saying this, I said tonight, if you want to know how things are getting in Barbados, ask your small business operator. The small businesses are the ones who are suffering the most. Ask Bailey down there at the back that running the shop. He will tell you that. Because you cannot run a shop, every expense going up, your client base is shrinking. How are you going to be able to get out and make money? And I'm saying this evening, we are now in a state of paralysis in Barbados as it relates to the economy of Barbados. And we continue to be adrift. I'm not telling you we are autopilot. We are not on autopilot. We are adrift. Right. I want to draw the distinction. Autopilot is when you set a path, you set a particular target, and you're flying towards that and you're laying back. Adrift is when you have set no target, you are aimlessly traveling in the ocean or in the air. We are adrift. And there are no answers coming from the people who have government. Now the major worries will, however, stretch way beyond the present or even for the next couple of years. My worry personally is about a stagnating and a stalling standard of living for Barbadians. If we continue like this, what is going to happen in the future is that all of the gains that we have made, folks, are going to be eroded. Right? The concern for most Barbadians, most right-thinking Barbadians, and all jokes aside, is that what we are seeing is our standard of living falling. Your children are being held prisoner by the Democratic Labour Party, man. Your grandchildren are being held prisoners by the Democratic Labour Party. And if it doesn't change, what is going to happen in this society is that those children are not going to enjoy the standard of living that even you have enjoyed in 2011. And that is my fear. And I'm saying we need to take back our future from the Democratic Labour Party.
The International Business Ministry, you heard me talk about the shortfall in tourism, where none of the investments that were projected to carry this country through as a fillip to this economy in difficult times, none of them have come to fruition. None. Well, the only other thing that Barbados has to carry it, comrades, is the international business sector. And in 1 year, the international business sector can bring in terms of tax take, about 3/4 of what the Ministry of Health's budget is. Over $300 million in 1 year. So you don't play around with something like that at this time. And we have a situation where, unprecedentedly so, the Chief Executive Officer of Invest Barbados, a statutory corporation run by the government, broke his silence, went on VOB, has not been contradicted. But a month ago, he went just the week before we had our annual conference, as though begging the Labour Party to notice him, to say that we have lost $1 billion, B-I-L-L, dollars in potential investment under George Hudson. And over 2,700 jobs. At a time when we are being penalized by Chris Sinclair. Increase in VAT, increase in diesel, increase in gasoline, increase in bottled gas, increase in road tax, increase in the excise tax, increase in the land tax, everything. All of that, take away allowances, all of that allegedly was supposed, according to the Democratic Labour Party soothsayers, they were inflicting this pain on your purse and mine because they wanted to preserve jobs. And Darcy Boyce was one of them who said that we have to do this in order to preserve jobs. Well, you know, again, just over a month ago, the reality was made clear. The bald and naked reality that employment in Barbados has been declining. The unemployment level in this country has almost trebled since we left government. And I say trebled for a reason. Because if you disaggregate the Guyanese that they sent home, if you disaggregate the Guyanese that they sent home, Barbados' unemployment in 2007 December would have had to have been around 4%. If you only look at the nationals of Barbados, today it is over 12 for men and over 13 for females. And galloping and going higher. So where are we? And all of this here from the short remains absolutely silent. But I was saying to you about the international business sector. The key thing about that international business sector, comrades, and the inescapable feature is that it is putting bread, or is supposed to put bread and butter on our table when that industry so well presided over by Noah Lynch, but about which we have limited control, starts to fail. When tourism starts to fail, there are times when you generally have very little control. You have a situation, as is the case in Great Britain, as is the case in across Europe, when their economies are bad. And many of them are going to say, look, this is discretionary income. Do we really want to travel this year, or let's put it off to next year? Now that is not to let Richard Seeley off the hook. Because equally, you have to realize that there are certain things that could have been done in terms of making the British market work for us that have not been done, but that's a different debate. But I want to say to you that when we have the international business sector entirely within our control as far as legislation goes, to make it seem adequate in the eyes of the foreign people who have to pass judgment on its authenticity and its transparency. And we fail as a people, and as a government, and as a parliament to bring the legislation, then we are failing the people of Barbados. And this government was notified in January of 2011. Sorry, December of 2010. December of 2010. That there were serious failings in the international business sector. And between then and now, what were the failings? They had not signed something called tax information exchange agreements with some critical countries. Do you know that we went to the final date, the final possible date before we were blacklisted and deemed to be the worst possible jurisdiction on the earth? The date, the last day, Barbados rushed in to say, look, we get two agreements signed. When you're supposed to have signed at least 10. And they had a situation where there's a whole raft of legislation that were supposed to be brought to make sure that you can satisfy the outside world, that you're taking measures to ensure that there's transparency in the way you do your business here. We've yet to scratch the surface. There is no urgency, there's no sense of obligation to the people. And the most offensive of the insults occurred in March, or April rather, when Great Britain, the mother country, looked at little England, Barbados, and said, we are negatively listing you, we are going to blacklist you too. And what did From the Short do? Well, this is really about the absence of leadership in this country. I don't mind George Hudson. I expected nothing out of him because you cannot get something from nothing. He is a nothingarian of class. But I expected a little bit of leadership from the Short. And From the Short threatened to write the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom to beg to ease us off the hook. Chris Sinclair threatened to write his counterpart, the Chancellor of the Exchequer. And I will be decent and say that I know that Chris Sinclair wrote the Chancellor of the Exchequer. I have no evidence that From the Short got beyond talking about writing to anybody. And Great Britain, by way of diplomatic correspondence, indicated in April, look, we're going to reverse our situation, our position on you. Not fully, but we can put you in the middle category. Because what Britain had effectively done was to put 3 categories on the table for offenders around the world. One set were those who you could deal with very easily, and they pretty much remain the same. The second set, you attach a penalty so that a British citizen doing business in your country and you are refusing to have the appropriate set of legislation in place to help avoid tax avoidance, then you are going to have to pay a penalty of 150% of whatever the amount of money it is that you are trying to evade in taxes. I say tax avoidance, tax evasion. The worst of the categories, which is the one we were placed in initially, was that you were going to be penalized 200%. So we had an international business sector where a lot of British expatriates come here and do business. And if the fellas decide that they're hiding something from the revenue, and the revenue could track them, their penalty was going to be 200% of whatever they hide. So you had $1 million hiding, you got to look for $2 million. And these fellas don't deal with little money like $1 million. Now, one would have thought that after Britain said, well listen, we ain't going to keep you down in the 200% category. We are going to, on condition that you do the necessary things and you sign a protocol with us, we are going to ease you back up to the 150%. I would have imagined, and I'm sure you would imagine, that the very first order of business for that man called from the shore would be to get his lazy what he sits upon up from in his chair and run out behind George Hudson to make sure that the thing is done and that Barbados is not utterly disgraced in the international community. Do you know that up to last night the thing they signed? Since March or April. So there is no sense of urgency on this government's part. It is a lawless, loitering bunch. Eric Barr described, I can't remember who they're talking about, but it suits the Democratic Party of today. I think it was foresight on Barr's part. We ain't talk about loitering on government premises after closing time. That's what they're doing, they're loitering long after closing time.